everybody. So we are going to talk about sources. And for some of your essays, you're required to use scholarly sources. So we'll talk a little bit about how to tell if a source is scholarly. And I'll give you some examples of what that looks like so that when you're out there on your own trying to find these sources, you kind of know what to look for and what to avoid. So first of all, we need to define what a scholarly source is. A source is considered scholarly when it is peer-reviewed. That means that other people who are experts in the subject have read the information and approved it. This is a fairly complicated process to get this done. So it's not things like just a random newspaper article or somebody new to the field writing about a particular topic. It's kind of difficult to get peer-reviewed and make it through that process. Once an article is peer-reviewed, then it can also be published in a reputable place like a journal or a reputable book publisher, and they all require these sources to be peer-reviewed before publication. So that's what we're mostly going to be looking at is journal articles. Sometimes .gov websites and national newspapers work for your essays. Just look at the essay prompt and my guidelines about the particular essay that you're writing. If you ever have a question about whether a source would work for an essay or not, you can always just ask me on the Remind app or via email or in office hours, and I'm happy to help you with it. So if you're ever in doubt, ask. You can ask a librarian, myself, a different teacher, or a tutor, and any of us should be able to help you figure out if that source will work for whatever essay you're writing. So here's some examples. These are just screenshots of sources that I have that I use in my classes. So you may or may not have read these in whichever class of mine you are currently taking. So this is one of the first pages of an article that's about college students' health. And we can see that there's a clear author named. Many scholarly sources actually have several authors who have collaborated to do the research and to write up their findings. So this is an example of that. We've got 3 different authors. And so we have their names listed, and then we also have their affiliations. So we know which universities they are a part of. So that gives us some credentials so that we know who this author is, we know where they work, and that they are probably, experts in the field, right? Because they're at a school of nursing, they're employed at a school of public health, and so on. And also having their names, we could look them up, right? We could search for other things they've written and so on to, kind of do our own background research about these individuals if we wanted to. We also have publication information that helps us to see that a source is scholarly. And this is one of the places that it can be listed. This is just a screenshot of a page in that same article. And you can see that we've got a page number up here, and also it tells us which journal this is published in. So this is published in the College Student Journal. Sometimes you'll see this at the top of the page, on the left, on the right. Sometimes it's down at the bottom of the page. Sometimes we have a page number and the journal. Other times we have other information listed. So look for that publication information, and it'll always either be at the top or bottom of the page. .gov websites are sometimes accepted depending on which class and which essay you're writing for me. So if you're looking for something like, statistics or something like that, a .gov website might be a good place to find that information. So for instance, this is from the Department of Justice, and you can tell because it's got a .gov ending on the website. Also, I accept some national newspapers. So for instance, the New York Times is one of those that generally is acceptable depending on who it is that's written the article and so on. So remember that newspaper articles also publish things like editorials where people can just write in with their opinions. So sometimes just because something is in a newspaper doesn't mean that it's scholarly and acceptable for what you're using as a scholarly source. But you can look into these sources and see if the article you would like to use is going to work for you. So one way to do that is to look at the author. So for instance, if it's in a newspaper, it should have a title. This is the title. And then it should also have an author or authors and a publication date. And in this case, you can click on the authors and see who these people are. So you can sort of do some research and decide if they look like they're reputable and knowledgeable enough in this field to use as a source in, say, a research paper. So if I click on one of the authors, it tells me who this person is, and what sorts of things he's done in his past and so on. So I could use that information to help me decide if this seems like a reputable source. So when we're reviewing sources, first you want to make sure that you have a named author with credentials. Then look at that publication information, such as a volume and issue number if it's in a journal article, or the name of the publisher or something like that. You should be able to find this information, even if it's like a .gov or even a newspaper article. If it's fairly reputable, you'll have this information there. If it's missing any of that stuff, it's kind of a red flag, and you should check with me or a tutor or a librarian to get some help about whether or not this is considered, scholarly or reputable enough. When you're using research databases, you need to check the box that says peer-reviewed or scholarly articles, and depending on the database that you're using, this will look different. But again, ask for help either from a librarian, from a tutor, or from me, and I can walk you through sort of what that looks like and how to make sure that you're checking those boxes so that your results will only be those peer-reviewed sources. Remember that sources are not scholarly and generally cannot be used if any of these things are happening. So if we don't have an author, that's a big red flag because we don't know who wrote it. Or if the author has no credentials listed and they're just sort of, writing about all kinds of different topics. Maybe they're not an expert in the field, so they can write about it like at the surface level, but it's not necessarily something we would want to use in certain papers where scholarly sources are required. You also want to be careful if the source is a website that's open to the public. So for instance, Wikipedia or a blog, and if the source is not peer-reviewed, such as, a magazine, certain newspapers, websites, all of those kinds of things. So again, this doesn't mean that it's a definite, you can never use these sources. What it means, though, is that these aren't scholarly peer-reviewed sources, so they're not acceptable for certain types of writing, such as, your research paper for this class. So we have an example here of a source that has no author. So I get these a lot in my classes because ProCon is available as one of the places that you can look to start your research on different things. And it gives you sort of the both sides of, hot topic issues like abortion, for instance, right? So it will explain to you what proponents say and what opponents say. And that's a great place to start your research. However, this doesn't have an author. It's a very general overview, and this itself is not a source that you could use. This is an example of an online newspaper, the Daily Beast. And this is an example of someone that doesn't have any credentials listed. So just because somebody is listed as an author on a piece doesn't mean that that person has the credentials needed for us to be able to say, yes, this is a scholarly source. And also, if you look at this down here, it says that this is an opinion piece. So you can write into any newspaper with your opinion on something, and there's a chance that they'll publish it in the newspaper under the editorial section. So we need to make sure that we're not getting opinion pieces and then, saying that those are scholarly, because it's just a different type of writing. Now, it doesn't mean that it has no merit or that it's not, important to certain groups and in certain cases, But what this means is that it's not a scholarly source, it's just this person's opinion on a particular topic. And again, that's an okay place to start and to have some of your research because you want to get different opinions about the topic at hand, but it's not scholarly. We also have some examples of problematic websites. So this one is Wikipedia. And while Wikipedia is a great place to start with research because it gives you overviews and links and whatnot. Sorry, my phone's ringing. However, Wikipedia is not a place that you would want to be ending with your research because anybody can edit what's on Wikipedia. So if you see this portion right here where it says that Wikipedia is written collaboratively by largely anonymous volunteers who write without pay, this lets us know that anybody can write something on Wikipedia. So while you might run into stuff where it's actually written by experts, and that's awesome, you can also run into things that are written by, some random person who just either happens to know a little bit about the subject or doesn't know about the subject and is just writing their opinion. So be a little bit wary of Wikipedia. Again, you can start there, but what you should do is follow those links that are given at the end of those Wikipedia articles so that you can get to more reputable sources and so that you can find more reputable information that you can use. This is another example of a problematic magazine or newspaper. So this is from The Onion. And if you're not familiar with The Onion, it is a newspaper, but it is full of satire. So it's all basically just like humorous pieces. They're written to kind of poke fun at current events. So I have had students who have tried to, include an article from something like The Onion as one of their scholarly sources, and I had to explain, no, you can't. This is actually satire. They're joking. It's not a real source in terms of like being scholarly. So check out, the background information of whatever piece you're looking at. Just do a quick Google search if you're not familiar with, say, The Onion, and that would let you know that this is satirical, not something that we would want to use for, say, a research paper. Another example of sort of just a random website is I've had students who have wanted to use things from yahoo.com, right? Where you can ask any question that you want and get any answer from a million people. So this is problematic because anybody can ask the question, and while it might be an interesting question, and maybe you'll get an expert who chimes in, most of the time you're just going to get answers from random people on the internet, and it's just, whoever's opinion, right? It's not based in fact or, years of research and whatnot like a scholarly journal would be. But the good news is that you can use these problematic sources in some cases. So for instance, if we wanted to use, say, Wikipedia, you could track down the references that are used in the articles and then start to take those references through the same types of checks that we just looked at, right? Look at the author, look at where it's published, and so on. And if those references are reputable, then you can use it. So remember to check your sources. For some writing assignments, it's important that your sources are scholarly. Using the information in these slides, you should be able to check your sources and make sure that they're scholarly. Again, if you're not sure, that's the time to talk to me. So a quick recap, use your databases to find those scholarly sources. And then once you've found them, make sure that they're reputable, because even in journal articles, there are things like editorials and book reviews that are published that are not necessarily something that's appropriate for some of the essays that we write in our classes. For a step-by-step guide on how to find sources using these databases at your university, look in the research paper packet. I took the time to write down step-by-step exactly how to do that at the different universities that I teach at. So check out that student research paper packet for information on that. And if you're ever not sure, Make sure that you talk to me or a tutor for help identifying whether or not your sources that you're thinking of using are scholarly. All right, as always, if you have questions, let me know and I'm happy to help.